Hi, I'm Cheyenne Adamson, and welcome back to the Phonics channel. Just a quick update. I have been gone for a little while, but now I'm back and I'm ready to bring you some new, fresh, original content, some ideas, and some videos that I think you guys are going to like. So without further ado, today's video is going to be on Common Core and the debate around Common Core in public schools. Since 2009, there's been a lot of passionate discussion and debate in the public about Common Core, and it's the newest education initiative in a long history of initiatives for what is supposed to be the best for American children in learning. This comes from Kathleen Porter McGee in the National Review, and she talks about this, and here's what she says. Here's what the Common Core state standards do. They simply delineate what children should know at each grade level and describe the skills that they must acquire to stay on course towards college or career readiness. They're not a curriculum, and it's up to the school districts to choose curricula that comply with the standards. The Fordham Institute has carefully examined Common Core and compared it with existing state standards, and it found that for most states, Common Core is a great improvement with regard to rigor and cohesiveness. So that's one side of the story. As listed by Pauline Hawkins in the Huffington Post, an accomplished English teacher, the 4 standards for reading and language arts of Common Core are: 1. Standard oral expression and listening. Number 2, reading for all purposes. Standard 3, writing and composition. Standard 4, research and reasoning. These standards seem reasonable and straightforward. Mrs. Hawkins says that these 4 are titles more than they are standards, but the Common Core standards document for reading, writing, and communicating includes detailed benchmarks or evidence outcomes for all grade levels, and this document is about 173 pages long. So upon further research, there are separate evidence outcomes written for math. Within Common Core literature, there are no standards written or mentioned for other subjects such as science and history, and this is kind of where it gets tricky. Common Core initiatives had put even more emphasis on testing and still causes problems in the learning environment. So now you're kind of getting the other side of the story as well. There are some people who really like Common Core, and there are others who don't actually like Common Core at all. And I'm thinking that the truth lies somewhere in between. Usually it's neither black or white, you got that fine gray area in between. For the first several years of Common Core in operation, teachers and their principals spent an inordinate amount of time delving into the benchmarks to figure out how to implement them. School districts scrambled to purchase curricula written that specifically earmarked the outcomes. And this is messy. This is messy business. And knowing teachers like I do, and many have their own ideas about what to do and in which order to do it. So the states are free to choose their own curricula in ways to do this. But I imagine that it undoes a little of what Common Core had in mind from the beginning, which is to have students across the country on the same page of ideas at the same time. So here's a reflection from Mrs. Hawkins. I'm sort of putting it in a nutshell of what she writes about and what she talks about here. She reflects what has been difficult in the past few years is having to unpack Common Core standards. We've spent countless hours reading through document for each level we teach, lining up our curriculum to what the standards deemed as critical skills, and looking at the skills students would be tested on in the spring, which now will be a battery of tests instead of just one. We had to switch our curriculum around so our students will be ready. So as you can see, it kind of presents a whole slew of problems. One, Common Core mandates that all students be on the same level, which, I mean, it seems impossible to get every student in every state on the same exact level with the same exact proficiency in reading and writing, not to mention that there's really no standards and no testing for math or science or social studies or social sciences, which is also a huge problem because students aren't actually focusing on a lot of these other subjects because the Common Core standards are making them focus so much on reading and writing that other things get left behind. Definitely some problems with Common Core that I think need to be addressed before it could be something that's fully implemented or something that's actually teaching ready. The students need to be made ready for the battery of tests that are now required. And the initiative before Common Core in reading was referred to as the No Child Left Behind, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And it was considered a dismal failure and put American students even further behind in their reading and other subjects. When reading fails, everything else is affected. which makes sense because the ability to read is nearly everything. One of the biggest criticisms of No Child Left Behind was that it relied heavily on testing and test results. Teachers felt compelled to teach the test, something that was nearly hush-hush in the No Child Left Behind days, not that long ago. However, the climate has changed, and it's no longer a taboo topic to speak aloud about teaching to the test. And if you guys want to know my opinion on teaching to the test, I think it has some merits, but I mostly think that it's not great because it's making children memorize a bunch of information and then regurgitate it for the test, and they're not really being tested on what they've learned so much as what they can memorize. And really, the human brain only has such a capacity to memorize so much information, and if it's under constant fear of not getting a good enough grade, how much information is that child really going to retain? So, some food for thought there. Common Core initiatives have put even more emphasis on testing, and it still causes problems in the learning environment, to say the least. Precious teaching time is taken away from students and teachers so that they can be prepared for the battery of tests. Again, test, test, tests. These tests have their own language to them, and students must understand it or they won't know what's expected on the test. The people who write or speak positively about Common Core initiatives say that it has great benefits to the students. On paper, it sounds great. Students will learn fewer things, but go deeper into the subject matter, learn critical thinking skills, and be able to move across the country, drop into any classroom, and know what's going on. Common Core is also supposed to be about leveling the playing field so that children who live in poverty have the same advantages as children that don't. Often the answer to the question of why Johnny can't read still is poverty. Poverty is also the common reason given for why prisons are so full of people raised in lower socioeconomic situations, and why high school dropout rates continue to climb. I do believe too much poverty exists, and that is a great contributor to why kids can't read. However, I do not believe that poverty is the answer as to why these particular problems have arisen. A teacher from Pennsylvania told me that she was required to read a book on poverty in America to understand that her lower socioeconomic kids should not be required to do their homework and that she shouldn't expect it of them. If some kids in poverty go on to do so well, why is it that poverty seems to be deemed the only reason why kids aren't doing well? It's a huge indicator of why some kids can't do well, but I don't think it's the only problem. And I think poverty often gets blamed for the ills of all of the education problems, when in fact it might only be a small part of it. With that being said, not requiring things like homework because of poverty doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One thing that occurs to me is that someone somewhere does not want certain people to succeed. But how can this be proven? I don't think that I can prove it here, but if we want to eradicate illiteracy and poverty, we must encourage and allow people to be educated. Not necessarily with free college, but long before that with basic tools that will help them get to anywhere that they want in life, whether it's college or endless entrepreneurship. When will we learn from our mistakes in education? And why can't we teach children the most basic foundational things to help them get ahead? Of all things, reading. It should be a simple thing to teach reading and thinking skills, yet it's difficult and political. However, study after study has been done and showed that systematic phonics approaches, widely known as explicit phonics, as you guys have heard me talk about ad nauseum on this channel, to reading far outplay the prevailing look-say or sight word or whole language methods, yet educators turn a blind eye time and time again with uneducated, unpracticed, and unproven opinions on the subject. So yeah, you guys know my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of whole language. I do think it has a place in the education system, but I think relying on any one thing as your pillar is a bad idea, because there's going to be some kids who do great with some principles of Common Core, and then there's going to be other kids that don't do great at all, as we're kind of seeing evidenced by these guidelines that are imposed with Common Core. And you're going to have kids who do great with phonics and other kids who need a combination of phonics and whole language. So as I said earlier, it really is a gray area. It really comes down. It's not black and white. We need a good combination of lots of approaches. So we're kind of getting a shotgun effect, so to speak, with all these kids. All these kids have different learning styles. We need to give them an approach that has a multifaceted type of learning. Whenever a systematic explicit phonics approach to reading is brought into a school, whether it's private or public, reading in the lowest of socioeconomic school districts, well, their scores go up. They always go up. First in reading and then in every other subject as reading improves. There's a lot of proof that systematic phonics approaches to reading are effective, but educators don't want to hear it. I don't know why. Try to discuss it with the school board member, or superintendent, or principal, or second grade reading teacher. Not all. There are some great second grade reading teachers out there. My hat's off to you. that use our program in their schools right now, and or use some sort of explicit phonics approach. But the discussion usually isn't coherent, and it's frustrating to you, to me, to everybody else who can see phonics and I can see how great it is and can see the dramatic effects that it has on students' reading levels. Yet the stubbornness remains. Some analysis by the National Reading Panel on why systematic phonics instruction helps students learn to read sheds a lot of light on the subject. Other proofs to the effectiveness of explicit phonics programs are in private schools and classical schools. Christian schools and homeschools also use this approach, and you can see the fruits. You can see them bearing the fruits of that labor. Those who use explicit phonics instruction to teach reading and language arts to their students are having tremendous success, and extreme misunderstandings and misinformation around the ideas related to explicit phonics methods of reading instruction are still there. At annual conference of the New England Reading Association held in October of 2015, nationally recognized reading experts Reggie Routman, Richard Allington, and P. David Pearson were trying to rally teachers against phonics. P. David Pearson is quoted as saying, "Phonics troops are gaining ground. They've already made inroads in states such as California, where legislation mandating a phonetic approach to teaching reading has been passed. Join me in the radical middle. If not, the voices from the far sides will be the voices that will be heard, and no one side will win." And I can kind of agree with him on some of those points. You don't want an extremist element on either side prevailing in education. But it definitely mystifies me as to why he doesn't see the benefits of phonics and why he's so anti-phonics. It seems strange, especially when so many kids are reading quite exquisitely from an explicit phonics approach. But anyways, who knows? The frustration lies in what they say about their own whole language methods, that they work. They do use phonics, and people are just too ignorant to know. But do they use phonics? A systematic explicit phonics approach to reading, when used correctly, consistently, and how it's intended, I believe far better teaches children how to think, how to decode and encode words, and it builds a strong vocabulary, fixes fluency problems, helps dyslexic tendencies, and it gives systematic tools for spelling, and it sets a solid foundation for reading comprehension and coherent, thoughtful writing. And children need the proper tools to read and think well, and they're not getting them from the schools that are constantly changing programs to make things better for only a few. Mainly the school board, mainly the superintendent, mainly for monetary purposes. A lot of that, I'm not trying to accuse, because I know we have a lot of teachers who probably watch this channel, I'm not trying to accuse like the teacher, the average teacher, but I do think there are a lot of politics that play a huge role in which curriculums and which approach gets implemented into a school. And sometimes I don't think it's for the better of the kids. Common Core is supposed to teach less and gets deeper into fewer ideas with students while spending more time teaching critical thinking skills. Does anyone think that American school kids in 2018 should be learning less? The statistics are dismal with how we're doing in math, science, and most basic needs to function in society. This is a complicated issue though, and schools blame parents, parents blame teachers, or schools and government blames poverty and other influences. Now, thank you so much for sticking with me through this rather longer video, but I would like to end with an intriguing idea. Education initiatives like Common Core aren't necessarily the main crux of the problems in education and reading in our schools today, but the methods indeed need fixed. Changing the methods in how reading and other subjects are taught would mean a major overhaul in thinking, training, and teaching from the university level down to the classroom teacher. And thank you so much, you guys, for watching the video. If you found it interesting, share it with a friend or a teacher or a homeschooler, whoever you think might benefit from seeing this video. And as always, my fellow educators, be well and stay classy. And why? Oh, when will we learn? Okay. Messed that up. And action.